Hey, what's up and welcome back to the channel. My name is Aaron and you are in the shred spot. This is where I make all of the trials tutorials that you see on this channel. Now today I'm going to do something just a little bit different. We're going to do a long-term review of a bike that I've been riding for the past year, and it's the Jitsie Varial Race. This is a 20-inch bike called a mod bike, which has a really thick rear tire. It's got a bash plate below and it's super light. Now the reason I'm reviewing this bike is that this is one of the bikes that you can get almost anywhere in the world. It's a really widely distributed bike company. There are multiple different models that they make, and this is their top-end mod bike. I would say at the upfront, this bike is super capable of lots of things. On this bike, I've been able to side hop 44 inches over a bar. I've been able to gap over 7 feet. All the things that you would expect a high-end bike to be able to do. No problem at all with that. This bike retails for $2,300 in the US, or if you're in Europe, it's about 1,800 euro. Now, what's interesting too about Jitsie is that they've only been making trials bikes since 2016. They started out in moto trials and then moved on to bike trials. So this is only a couple years in for them and definitely a solid start. So I'm gonna start out with some of the things that I really like about this bike. And the first thing on that list is the weight of the bike. This bike is 17.5 pounds or about 7.9 kilos, which means it's super light when it comes out of the box, but it's not the lightest mod bike. You're not sacrificing a lot of weight for strength on this bike. You're getting everything you need to make sure that it's sturdy and that you can trust the bike. There are only two places on this bike that I've found that they've really chopped anything out, and that's in the head tube and in the rims themselves, which are both relatively common in almost every trials bike I've seen. Although they've taken a little bit of material off the front of the head tube, they've done some other interesting things with it, and that is to taper the head tube out. So it kind of flares at the bottom where it gets wider around the bottom where the fork connects to the actual frame. And I've seen this a lot in some of the newer mod bikes as well, where they're making that front part of the bike really strong. It used to be that every trials bike was just a pogo stick and you didn't need to even worry about the front part of the bike. But now that we're doing moves like jump to front wheel or hooks where you're kind of hanging off the front wheel, this section right here needs to be super strong. So the fact that they've kind of flared it out and made it a bit stronger and wider is a good sign. They've also added a part to the fork here where you actually have a through axle, which is making the front part of the bike even sturdier and stronger. Even with the weight of this bike being where it's at, it comes with dual discs. So you've got a disc on the front and the back, and there are some options where you can get rim brakes on either the front or the back, but I chose to go in all disc models. So to have a bike that has front and rear disc brakes and still have it under 18 pounds is pretty impressive. The brakes are super strong. They stop just as well as rim brakes do in my opinion, but they're quite a bit quieter than having ground up rims and just squeaking away. Overall with the bike too, I would say that the spec on the bike, what they chose for parts, for the most part, was really good. The quality of the parts is strong. I felt confident in most of the bike. I didn't feel like the bike or the components were holding me back in any way, shape, or form. Overall, the bike has a really sturdy and solid feel. I didn't feel like they really skimped on much of anything when it came to putting this bike together. All that said, I do have some notes. Now on a bike this complex, there's always gonna be a couple things that could improve just a little bit, or maybe they didn't put as much thought into and things like that. And it's necessary when you're going through and doing a long-term review. I've had time to like really figure out if something was a one-off or if this is something that is kind of consistent with the design here. And so I wanna share a few things that kind of stood out to me on the bike that I would love to see change in the future. The first thing I want to call out is the brake adjustment knob. So how it goes is when you're pulling on the lever, there's a knob underneath it which can affect the power of the brakes that you have. And you have this one bolt that you kind of wind in or wind out to adjust how strong the brakes actually are, how much fluid the hydraulic brakes are pushing. And this one bolt rattles free on almost every single ride. I haven't had a ride yet in the last year where I haven't had to just give it a quarter tighten or a little bit more, because it's just one bolt going through this one piece. It keeps backing itself out, and it's done that on both brakes over the course of the year. I can't push it in much further than it already is because it's already pretty strong, so it's not something you can just crank down a bunch of turns and hope for the best. This is an area that I think could improve. I've never seen any other bike have it that way, where it's underneath the lever like that, where you would twist it in. So hopefully there's another way to go about that. I suppose I could probably throw some Loctite in there, but again, this is a piece that's supposed to be adjustable on a regular basis, and so I don't know if I necessarily want to lock it down. The next thing I want to call out are the horizontal dropouts at the back of the bike. Now the front of the bike has a through axle, and most new bikes have through axles on the front and back of the bike, and that's to make the bike a lot more stiff and sturdy when you're on there. It also affects the chain tension and how you're able to tension the chain, which leads me to my next point. This bike, because it has horizontal dropouts, uses a thing called a Snail Cam. And basically what it is, it's a little metal disc that has notches in it, and you can rotate the disc back to hold the wheel in place where it is. It's a little confusing, and it's also tech from like 1990. It's something that I've seen on motorcycles as well, but in this case, I just don't think it's exactly the right thing to keep the wheel in place, and I definitely struggled with getting it set up when I first built the bike. The bikes that I'm riding now, all the stock bikes that are coming out new and most of the new mod bikes have a chain tensioner built in, so they have a through axle that just keeps the wheel in one place, and then the chain tensioner tightens the chain. Whereas here, you're relying on this little disc of metal to not only hold the wheel in place, but also tension the chain. So this little metal disc is doing two jobs at the same time. And as I was thinking about maybe putting a different chain on there or whatever, it just caused all kinds of problems. So the Snail Cams have got to go. Horizontal dropouts for a bike that's the top end bike, I feel like you got to put through axles in there. The next thing that had me scratching my head on this bike was the stem that they sent with it. Now I ended up breaking the stem, but the original one was 150 mils long by a 25-degree rise. The replacement stem that they sent was 175 millimeters in length and 35 degrees in rise. And this stem made this bike totally come alive. It gave me better control on the back wheel. It gave me more room to move around. It was the right stem to belong on this bike. What I don't understand is having a stem on the bike that doesn't make the bike pop the way that it probably should. Why do I need to always put aftermarket parts on my bike to make it ride how it's supposed to? I never understand that. The next thing with the stem is the way that they designed the faceplate for it. So instead of having one plate that covers up the handlebar, it actually has these two little pieces that cross over the bar, but they're not helping each other out. They're just individual clamps that are holding the bar onto the stem. And that for me was really confusing. It's no surprise that one of the bolts in the stem ended up failing and popping off.
What was that?
I just don't really know if I love this faceplate design. I think it could be done better. On top of that, when I did break the stem, the design of the stem has this little angle here, right? And to make it flush and make it look cool and everything, the steerer tube of the bike had to be cut to match. And so I couldn't actually put a normal Trial Tech stem on there because it would be missing one of the bolts as I slid it on. I needed to get another Jitsie stem that has this angle on the top of it so I could use it with this bike. Or I'd have to replace the entire fork when I replaced the stem. I don't know if I totally love that either. I mean, the new Jitsie stem that I got has been working great and I'm happy with it, but the idea of having to run their stems, especially after you break one and you're feeling kind of whatever about it, I just don't know. I'd rather that it was a straight cut and they didn't try to be so fancy with this little edge right here. So I've said my piece on this bike and the things that I have struggled with over the past year. But overall, this bike is super capable. I've been able to ride at my highest level. Like I said in the beginning, I knocked down a 44-inch side hop. I've been able to gap over 7 feet. There's nothing on this bike that's really holding me back, and that's exciting. Furthermore, I hadn't ridden a mod bike in almost 20 years, and this is the bike that got me back on it. It's accessible. Like I said, you can get this all over the world, and it's a pretty reasonable price for what you get out of this bike. Any bike that you can get that's a top-end bike for around $2,000 right now is pretty darn good. If you think about what a mountain bike in the top end would cost, this is almost nothing by comparison. The other thing is that Jitsie makes a lot of different levels of bikes that you can get your hands on. You don't have to go for the race version that the guys are riding in World Cups right out of the gate, that's for sure. So overall, am I happy with this bike? Absolutely. It's been a great year riding this bike, and it got me in the door again on 20-inch bikes. I'm super grateful for that. If you want to see what it looked like when I first started riding this bike, when I first pulled it out of the box, check out this video right here. And if you want to see what happened afterwards, check out this bike right here. I think it's fair to say that the Jitsie was the gateway bike, and then the dream bike came next.